Hi, I'm Hillary Walsh, a serial entrepreneur, award-winning immigration lawyer, and former law professor. Over the past decade, I've helped thousands of immigrants live free in the United States. We're talking work permits, green cards, their citizenship, and lots of successful appeals. If I know one thing, it's that immigration law is complicated, and let's face it, legal advice can be expensive. That's why I created this podcast, to share both the practical legal knowledge and the real immigrant success stories behind the law. In each episode, we'll either break down complex laws into simple steps you can understand, or invite you to listen to the inspiring stories of people who've successfully navigated their immigration journey. For my old friends, welcome back to the show. And for my new listeners, welcome to Immigration Law Made Easy, where we believe that everyone deserves to live free. Let's begin. All right, welcome to our 100th episode of Immigration Law Made Easy. This podcast is taking we're going on a new adventure because this podcast, I originally created it to be educational for people trying to figure out their pathways, figure out what are some of the more specific areas of immigration law like VAWA, T-Visa, so people would gain awareness about that. But as we transition forward, I really want this to be a podcast that tells stories. So rather than just teaching what immigration law is, I want to show. And what better way to really show people what DACA is, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. What DACA is what better way to do that than to show who DACA is and put a face to the name? Because when we talk about DACA recipients and DACA holders and DACA kids, we're talking about a whole group of people. And I believe that anytime we talk about people in mass, we dehumanize them.
Right.
So this is our opportunity to interview Itzel Bailon, which is my great pleasure. Itzel and I have worked together since 2020. It was crazy times in the pandemic when we started working together. And we made it through that. And we've made it through a Trump administration before. And now we're doing it again. So Itzel, thank you so much for being our first transition guest on the podcast.
No, thank you for having me and for actually providing this platform so that, my story can be something that other people, like you said, that have deferred action can actually identify themselves with. And for the people who just hear DACA and don't really know, well, why does this matter? This is why it matters.
This is why it matters. Okay, so in order to have DACA, you have to have come to the United States before you're 16. And it doesn't matter if you came to the U.S. legally, like with a tourist visa, or illegally. You can be granted DACA if you came before a certain age and you met other requirements. But when you came to the U.S. as a little girl, DACA didn't exist. So let's go to the extent we can in order. You were born in Mexico.
Yes.
And you're one of 6 kids.
The youngest of the girls.
Youngest of the girls.
So my mom was, I don't know, sometimes I say fortunate enough, but, sometimes I also feel like, damn.
That's a lot of kids.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, my mom has six kids, 3 boys, 3 girls.
When did you come to the U.S.?
I think I was 9. I remember I had just started 4th grade in Mexico. And then shortly after, it was like, we're moving, surprise.
Looking back, now, you've talked to your mom about, as a 9-year-old, who knows what your mom told you about why you're moving. But looking back, kind of what was going on that caused your whole family to come to the United States?
I guess for one of the main reasons really was that my mom knew that she wanted more for her kids than what we would see day to day in Mexico. So where we lived was in Ciudad Juárez in Chihuahua, which at that time, it was during a very violent period of time where women were disappearing. Women were being kidnapped and then later found
murdered.
So essentially, my mom having 3 daughters, who are eventually going to go into adolescence, young adults, then the fear kind of starts building up. Like, this isn't where I want to raise my kids. Not only were we struggling financially, we lived in one room, all 6 of us. And I remember that there was one bed for the kids. So 3 would sleep on the floor, 3 would sleep on the bed. And then the next day we would switch, and it kind of went that way for as long as I could remember, every time, like whenever we lived in Mexico the whole time. And there really wasn't luxuries per se. We had food, if you consider beans and eggs your everyday food, like that's what it was for us. That was the cheapest thing. And if you're trying to provide for 6 kids, that you're going to be resourceful and give them that.
You were also seeing a lot of violence.
Yes. Our neighborhood there was a lot of gang members. It was also the growing cartels that were there. I remember that there was this one time where me and my brothers were getting ready to go to school, and when we were going to open the door to leave, there was just a body there, and at that time we were scared, but it didn't really cross our minds how serious that was, that all of this is really going on.
Literally
outside.
On your doorstep. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was something that you would just see everywhere, But not only that, you weren't just seeing the violence outside your home, but you were seeing it inside. And I think that was the toughest thing, that you can escape the streets, but you couldn't really escape what was going on inside the house.
Yeah. So your stepdad decided everyone was going to move to the United States, and that was what was going to happen. And your mom seeing some of these other things going on, I think on one hand, from having talked to you before, do you think that she had a lot of choice in her decision to come to the U.S. with all of you?
I don't think she really did. But then at the same time, it's like this is the only support system that you have, this men. So it's like either go or you stay here and figure it out, So, yeah, looking at it, I don't think that there really was a better choice for her.
So here you are, a little 4th grader. Did your family enter with a visa, or did you enter illegally?
We entered illegally.
Okay. So you enter the country, you get to the U.S., and you start going to school. You start kind of probably, do you remember learning English, or were you speaking English in the home when you were in Mexico?
No, in Mexico, at least when I was in 4th grade, there was no such thing as like English classes. So it was a total shocker for me, because since I was very young, since I first started school, I had always been very smart, or teachers would consider me very smart. But then when I got here, it was like, oh no, you can't speak English? You're not smart, and that really took a toll for me. That was very difficult for me to accept that I couldn't understand my teachers. I remember my 4th grade teacher, I believe her name was Mrs. Schultz, did not speak a drop of Spanish. So
I had to figure it out.
I could not even communicate with her, If I needed to go to the bathroom, if I needed to get a drink of water, I just couldn't communicate with her. And yeah, I remember taking ESL classes for, I want to say, the first year and a half. And then after 5th grade, I was really determined. I would go home, read those little kindergarten books as a 4th or 5th grader, and really determine, I'm going to understand the language. This is what it is. I have no choice. I'm here. And I just basically have to adapt to this lifestyle now.
And I want to fast forward a little bit to the end of your high school, and you graduated a year early. So you went from in the 4th grade not speaking any English to in the 11th grade, so 6-ish years later, graduating with honors. Did I do that math right? Maybe it's 7 years later. 7 years later, graduating with honors and graduating high school as a junior. Is that real?
Yes. I told myself, that I would be somebody, that I didn't just cross the desert for 3 days to be nothing, that it was going to be worth it. During my high school years, I I didn't really have a social life. I played soccer. I also took general education classes during the weekends and during summer breaks at Glendale Community College. That there was a program that was offered in high school where you can take your prerequisites while you were still in high school as part of a scholarship. And so I did that for some time. And so I remember talking to my counselor. I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm ready. Like, I want to be an adult. I want to have an education, have a career. How can I do this faster? It's like, well, you can go to night school and you can do your senior year during your junior year, but you're not going to have a life. You need to enjoy high school. I'm like, no, there's always time to enjoy life. And yeah, my junior year, I went to school morning, night, weekends, and I graduated my junior year, top 20 of that senior class.
Incredible. It truly is. I've told you this so many times because I've said you're extraordinary, but sometimes I am still astounded to hear not only what your experience is, but how you have still just figured it out. I kind of feel pathetic that I still haven't learned Spanish. Like, it's been 6 years. And I could have. Yeah, it is hard. Well, any second language I think is hard, but it's very commendable that you showed up, walked across the desert for 3 days with your mom and stepdad and your siblings. And the violence in the home that you experienced in Mexico continued when you lived here.
It did. And thankfully it was for a very short period of time. Eventually this man decided, life in the U.S. wasn't the thing for him and just left. He just disappeared from our lives, and all of my brothers were devastated because their dad was gone. I was so relieved. I figured that it couldn't have gotten worse for me. Anything besides him would be better. And it really took a lot of adapting for my mom to, take on the duty of a single mom with 6 kids. And so I think because of that, just seeing how my mom would wake up every single morning to go to work and to provide for us really pushed me to say, I want to do better. I want to be able to one day have a career where my mom no longer has to work, where my mom doesn't have to put up with all of this abuse from anybody just to be able to feed her children. And I think that really was, which is pushed me to just say, I can, and I have to do better for myself.
No. When it was time for you to graduate high school and you're excited to continue this, I think, were you offered scholarships? Kind of what was the next step for you? Right out, you're a junior, you're graduating early. You had to be 17, probably 17 when you graduated?
I was 17. I was not even 18. So I wasn't even an adult, but I had to start making adult decisions already. But just going back a little bit, I remember my first scholarship that I was offered. It was during my, I want to say 7th or 8th grade. I was in middle school. Because since, again, very young age, in middle school, one of my honors classes teachers said, you know what, you're eligible for the gifted program. And there was a gifted program that was offered at a different middle school. My mom's like, yeah, we're going to sign you up. You're going to go, and I hated it. I hated it because I was away from everything that I knew. But, I was getting scholarship offers, and unfortunately, everything was great until the status was an issue. But needless to say, I continued to push myself forward, and then I graduated my junior year. And the first thing I did is I went to Grand Canyon University. I talked to somebody there, and I was like, you know what? I really want to do the nursing program. At the time, I thought I wanted to do nursing. And during this time, there was a lot of talk about Obama was going to do something for young adults that came here as children, but it was just still kind of all in the works in 2011. And so I remember going in, they're like, well, you can start the program, but at some point you're going to have to do an internship and you can't graduate because you need a social security in order to do that. So again, you're also not eligible for financial aid. You have to pay out of pocket. And so
how do you do that? When did you first figure out that, I'm guessing you were old enough to know when you cross the desert that what we're doing is not on the up and up. And then you're living in the U.S. and you're not probably talking to anybody about your status. But when did you figure out you had to have a social security number to go to college?
So while I was still in high school, the scholarship that I was granted was ended because they asked for social security verification and I couldn't provide it. So I remember I hadn't even graduated yet and I started looking for options. I remember going to an attorney's office and trying to figure out, like, what can I do? I want to get legal here. Like, I've been here all my life, basically. I have all of this honors classes. I've been doing really good. I'm about to graduate pretty soon. And I want to go to college. And they're like, well, you don't seem to fall under any of...
There's nothing
for you.
There's nothing. Did they tell you to get married?
They did.
They did. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's that would be at the time. And frankly, even now today, that's one of the options is because now DACA, they're not processing new people for DACA. So there are probably tens of thousands of young people who are just like you in 2011, graduating high school, looking for the next step in education or even in work and being told, sorry, we can't help you. Employers can't hire you, even though you have done exceptionally well, despite the difficult hand that you've been given. You should go get married. Find a U.S. citizen and get married. Fall in love. Make sure it's not for fraudulent purposes, but fall in love and get married. And that is, when you've grown up in so much domestic violence, that alone had to be discouraging to hear because men had not been something that had been a good thing for you.
Yeah, no, that is definitely true. I remember hearing that and I'm like, there's really no other option. I'm like, I just kind of thought of everything. I'm like, I don't want to end up the same way that, having to put up with what my mom had to put up.
Mm-hmm.
And even worse, because then it's like, if I have to depend on a man for me to be legal in this country, then the chances are that it's not going to be good for me, you know?
Right. And we see that. You and I have worked together at the firm for, I guess it's now our 5th anniversary this year, here coming up. And that's wild to think of. But we have watched our kids grow up together. We've watched our kids grow up and been able to, I can't believe it. They're out of diapers. I remember when. But we've seen so many people who, that's exactly what happens, is their U.S. citizen spouse completely uses the fact that they're supposed to petition for them. And these are people who are marrying for love. It's not that I've gone out and done some sham marriage. These are people who got married because they love this person. But then when it comes time for them to actually petition for them, they use that as leverage and hold that over them constantly. And so your instinct and your concern, we see it every single day in the firm. And that was 15 years ago, So you are able to eventually, you hear about this thing called DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Tell me a little bit about how that process, what you heard of, what the next steps were. What was it like being one of the initial recipients?
Honestly, I don't think I knew just all the good that would come from it. Until it was really in my hands. I remember at the time trying to gather all the documents. And when I filed it, it was approved very, very fast, and I was so surprised. And this is a funny story, but remember how I told you that I went to talk to an immigration attorney? Well, that attorney was the one that told me, if this passes, you would be a perfect candidate for it. And he literally kept in touch with me.
Wow.
And so when it finally got implemented, he reached out to me and he was like, I would be more than happy to help you.
Wow.
And as a matter of fact, trying to start my own practice. I would love for you to come work with me. It really was just him looking at all of my school records that really made him say, I want you in my team. Time passed, we applied for DACA, and I eventually got granted. And the first thing that I did is I emailed him a couple months later, and I was like, hey, I finally got it. Are you still looking for somebody?
And so the law firm job, like the law firm career, begins.
Yeah. I remember I was working at a jewelry store at that time. And I had only been there for a month. So when he finally reached out to me, he was like, yeah, come in for an interview, and we closed the deal that day. And I originally started as just the receptionist. You were just going to be the front desk receptionist. And then 2 weeks later, it's like, my paralegal's leaving. So you have 2 weeks to learn everything that's in this office because you'll be taking on the cases with me. And then I guess at that point, I was glad that I did not pursue a nursing career.
Yeah. You had to learn a whole new language in 2 weeks at that point because immigration law really is a whole other language. Yeah. Along the way, you had babies.
3.
You had 3 babies.
Twins. Yeah, I guess now that I look at it, it's like they really have been the reason for my resilience. But then there's other times where I see them and I'm like, you also remind me of a very difficult part of my life. Just like you said, some of our clients really meet somebody and they start a family out of love. That was me. I was young, and quite frankly, my dreams were crushed because I couldn't go to school, no matter how smart I was, And so I essentially started accepting that my destiny was different. And I met somebody who I thought I wanted to build a family, who I thought loved me. And it's funny because then the story repeats itself, Everything that I said I would never allow for men to do to me, from seeing my own mother go through that, is essentially what happened to me and much more, But out of that very dark time of my life, I got 3 beautiful kids. And I think if it wasn't really for them, I would have never been able to pull myself out of that situation, because I realized this story repeats with me, and I have a daughter. I can't let the story repeat itself with her. Or I can't let my kids grow up, the boys, and later on think it's okay to treat women like this. Because I don't want for them to do what somebody did to their mom, to their grandma, and then cause that pain to somebody else's daughter.
It's a big responsibility, parenting and breaking a cycle and healing and trying to get your immigration status and working full time.
It is. And at some point you kind of start putting yourself at the very end. You come last. And it's also because, unfortunately, the way that I was raised, society tells you that before you're a woman, you're all of these other things. You're a wife, you're a mother, you're a caregiver. But it really isn't true. It's like if you are not a woman before anything else, you can be all of these things that society tells you that you have to be. It really is very shocking once now that I've kind of processed it all, to really think that a lot of the stories that we hear from some of our clients, I lived those stories myself.
You and I started working together in 2020. You started to hear about things like T visas and VAWA, and we spent a lot of time helping domestic violence survivors. Has that been, and you're saying, you see a lot of yourself in our clients. How have you learned to process that? Because meanwhile, you're also dealing with a narrative in the media that calls you a criminal and calls you an illegal and says you should not be proud of being Mexican. stop waving your flag, right? Like, speak English only. How do you balance hearing so many people's stories, knowing what's going on in your own personal life, and then frankly just being so misunderstood?
Part of it, it does create a lot of anger, because again, I didn't choose to come here. I was brought here as a child, and now looking forward, I'm very glad that my mom did that. Because in Mexico, I would have either been dead or quite frankly, prostituted. We didn't have the resources. We just simply didn't. And for someone to just say that we're all criminals because we come here looking for a better life, or that we're taking the jobs of others, it's like, well, I've had to work very dehumanizing jobs before I got here. And we all do what we possibly can. We have to work twice as hard to get where we are. I guess really for me, the only thing is like I can relate to our clients on a much deeper level. And I understand a lot of those fears. I understand that society labels us as a bad thing, and that we shouldn't be proud of who we are. And while I'll always be proud to be Mexican, I do identify as an American because I lived here my whole life. I've learned the ways of, just the lifestyle here. And I know that I'm not a criminal. I have unfortunately met a lot of people who are born here, who've lived here their whole life, and who have generally done nothing but damage people. Mm-hmm. I've firsthand know that. And I can tell you, the things that some people do, I would never wish that upon my worst enemy. So when I hear a lot of the stories that our clients tell us, and a lot of it causes a lot of shame, and you don't want to talk about it, and you also don't want to disclose it, because then a lot of the times it's like, well, nobody told you to come here. This happened to you because you decided to come to a country that didn't belong to you. But it's like, well, how would you know? How would you know everything that someone has to put up with? It's very difficult trying to understand that while raising my own children who are born here in the U.S., but then who also still have those Hispanic roots within them. It's very hard, I think we're having this conversation that with everything that has been going on, I was talking to my 7-year-old and my 9-year-old kids about just everything. And I remember them telling me, well, Mom, you don't have to worry about getting deported. You're born here. And it was a total shocker for them to learn that Mom, who speaks English, who went to school here, who's never been arrested, who does nothing but wake up every single morning, makes their breakfast, gets them ready to school, then goes off to work, then go to school, then comes home, helps with homework. It was very difficult for them to understand that this, I guess, perfect woman, like they see me, does not belong in this country, according to what media says. And they cried, they're like, but why would someone want to deport you? I was like, I know. It's just people who don't understand. People who don't know all the things that immigrants have to do. Like everything that we put up with, everything that we go through, the stuff that we don't ever tell nobody. So it's very hard to manage all of those emotions while raising little kids that are aware of everything. And the last thing I want to do is I don't want to put an adult burden on my kids. Like they shouldn't have to know about these issues. But then at the same time, I feel like it is my responsibility as a parent for them to be aware of these things. So that they know, there's other people. Not everybody that's here is born here, but that doesn't make them a bad person.
I think so much of life right now, we've lost, everything is black and white. when we talk about things in the media, everything is black and white. Either you're a criminal or you're not. Either you're legal or you're illegal. And then there's DACA, which of course is this in the middle area. And there's so much more context and so much more to every human's experience that explains so many things. And when we can appreciate that, I think that's where we can have a lot more understanding. How do you go from everything that you've been through, and I'm guessing it's your faith, going from everything that you've been through to still having so much hope and faith in the system? Because a lot of the things that have been so hard in your life, really unspeakable things, have happened in this country. Yes, some of it happened in Mexico too, but so many horrible things have happened in this country. And all that you have right now is temporary protection that you have to renew every so often. And that temporary protection might actually go away. The writing is on the wall. That I really do worry that is the next step. How do you stay full of hope and so compassionate and have a love for this country when this is some of the conversation that's going on?
It really is hard. It's hard because you think about everything that you have to lose now. Originally, I came as a child, but now I'm an adult that has a job that thankfully is able to help other people. But then I also am a mother, and I have 3 kids. And I think that is the most concerning thing for me, to ever be put in a situation where I could be separated from my kids. And unfortunately, there really isn't another person that I can say I trust them with my life to care for my children. Like you said, there's been a lot of stuff that did happen to me in Mexico, but I can honestly tell you that the worst part has happened to me here, and unfortunately, because I have still always felt in this limbo, I stayed quiet about a lot of the things, which is crazy because I worked in immigration. So I'm always that person telling people, you have rights, you can call the police if somebody's hurting you, the police will protect you until you're the one in that situation. And someone's constantly telling you, you have no rights.
You start to believe it.
You're just an illegal here,
Yeah.
If I want, I can go to court, take the kids from you. You will never see your kids again. And you really start to believe that. And even with DACA, you end up falling into this black hole of abuse. Because you're legal, but you're not really legal. So there's still always that fear of maybe this person's right. Maybe this person might actually do what they said they're going to do, and I have nothing, how can I fight? And it's just very hard to kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel a lot of the times. And more than anything, it's not for you, but it's just for everything that you lose if you're wrong. If the system's not in your favor, that there's a system and that it's fair for the most part, but then what if it isn't? Then what happens? It's a difficult thing.
If you could explain to someone what it's like to be you, someone who's been told they're gifted their whole life, that they are extraordinary, and you have proven to be those things. Look at it on paper. Everyone who's ever known you has said that. And then you also have this other life that is so hard, and you're still looking forward and forging the path so that your kids have safety and security. You're healing along the way. What's it like to be you right now when this narrative, this conversation is going on about, frankly, you? What's that like?
It almost feels like I am all these different versions of myself in one. You have the professional side of it, which I think it's safe to say that a lot of people admire. You also have the mom side, who's trying to break all of this generational trauma and teaching your kids about, compassion and being emotionally intelligent. But then you also have this very broken version of yourself. It's almost like a very shameful part of you. And sometimes you just want to forget that shameful part, but forgetting it doesn't mean that you've healed from it. So I've had to learn to process it all, and really just learn, how can I grow from this? How can I take this and create something beautiful out of it? It doesn't get more beautiful than my kids. And when you really get to know them, you understand why. And so I really think that part of it is just seeing that everything that I've created along the way, both the good and the bad. I can say that the good always outweighs all the bad stuff in my life. I've been hurt a lot by people who I blindly trusted. That has also made me, in essence, the person that I am today, the person that can say, I've been a very broken version of myself, but I've rebuilt myself. And I continue to rebuild myself each and every day. And the goal is always that the next day will be better than the last. And I have made a lot of really good changes. And part of it, I honestly think that it really comes from being able to work here. That I've been able to empower myself to just say, I have to be a voice for a lot of the immigrant community. So it really is just that.
Putting your kids aside, what are you most proud of in your life?
I would honestly say going back to school 10 years later.
Tell me how that went down. Remind me. I was going to say, you also have this really stubborn quality to you, which I think is what is part of the resiliency. But there is a stubborn element, which is good. Everyone needs a little stubbornness. But you decided to go back to school 10 years later with 3 little kids.
Yes. Yes. I remember having a conversation, and I told you it had always been a dream of mine to go back to school. It just, even after the years passed and I became all these other different things, I still always wanted to go to school.
I think it's even beyond school. There's a dream beyond where we're at right now, right? What is the longer term dream?
I eventually want to be an immigration attorney.
That's going to happen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and honestly, it was going back to school was by far my biggest fear, because I kept telling myself for many years, I can't do this. I can't do this. School's just not for me anymore. I have all these other responsibilities with life, and there's just no time for it. And I remember you and I having that conversation. And I'm really glad that was that decision, that you have to go back to school. And thankfully you have been honestly such a savior.
Well, you got a full scholarship. So I had encouraged you just go part-time, take a few classes, let's dip our toe in the water. And in traditional Itzel format, it was, and then look, I got a full ride for as many degrees within my 4 years that I can possibly get, but I have to go full time.
Yes. And I didn't know until 2 weeks before the semester was going to start.
Yes. And so it was, I'm pushing you over the edge of just start, you're never going to get there unless you start, take one class, whatever. And then you come in and you're like, I have to choose. I have this amazing opportunity, or I can do one class at a time and kind of pay for it, and it's going to take me forever. And so you have been in school full-time, working full-time. You're a single mom. You go to the gym all the time. It's your sanity, which also blows my mind that you don't just collapse at night and fall asleep. But how has it been in the classroom? And why is that your source of great pride of all the things you've done? Why is that the great thing for you, the thing you're most proud of?
Well, for one, I am the first one in my family to go to a university. Secondly, because it was the same university I went to right after high school. And they told me I couldn't.
Keep going. Yeah.
And because I just simply, I didn't think I could do it. You know, I didn't think that I could manage it all. School, work, family, and still be able to work out, which, I mean, it has not been easy. I'll tell you that. It's come with its challenges, but that really is a great sense of pride for me, because it goes to show that we're not criminals. You know, we're here to do the good things. A lot of us, speaking for myself, like, we just want to build the future. Going back to school 10 years later was a little bit of a shocker to be in a classroom with like 18, 19-year-olds. And here I am, you know, single mom of 3. So a lot of the times I felt like there's really nothing for me to talk to these people about. Like, we don't have anything in common, you know, but at the end of the day, I was like, I'm here because I want to be here. You know, and I fought my way to get to this classroom. And just sitting in a classroom is such a privilege for me. And even better that there was someone out there willing to put their money on me, literally, so that I can go to school full time and so that I can work on this degree, so that next one down the road would be law school.
Yeah. What would you say to people who are in your same situation, got DACA, or maybe they've graduated and they were another version of you, the pre-DACA version? What do you say to those people to give them hope?
The light does eventually come, even when it doesn't seem like it. I mean, things do eventually get better. And yes, you might have to work twice as hard as the next person, but you can, and you will eventually achieve your dreams if you just keep pursuing them. It's not going to be easy, you know, but at the end of the day, once you've actually achieved every single milestone that you set out for yourself, there's such a huge sense of achievement and just like this pride, you know, to say, I did that. Against adversity, I did that.
It is such a pleasure to know you. It is a pleasure to observe you and go through everything that you're doing with such grace and still be so available to help so many people. The number of people you've helped get status while waiting for your own, you really couldn't count. Just here in our own firm, like in the past 5 years, we couldn't count the number of people who you've helped get their documents, and you've been so sincerely happy for every person, and never at all an ounce of, when is it my turn? It was just on to the next person. Let's help the next person. And there's been some assholes along the way who we even got them their papers. But I just appreciate you so much. And I'm very, very honored to know you. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
My friends, thank you so much for joining me for our 100th episode of Immigration Law Made Easy. It's such a big celebration. I'm so excited that we're here. But above and beyond that, I'm so happy that I got to introduce you to Itzel. If you don't already know her, then I know that you're already falling in love with her, just like so many people I know who have met her and learned to love her. But above and beyond Itzel's story is her story, and her life represents thousands and thousands of people who are stuck in limbo unnecessarily. The reason DACA was created by President Obama, basically through an executive order, was because lawmakers couldn't get the DREAM Act to pass. They couldn't get everyone in our lawmaking body to agree that people who were dreamers, people who have been brought here as children, they ought to have a pathway to residency, but we couldn't agree about how to do that. And so DACA was created to basically fill the gap while the Senate went back to the drawing board and tried to create something that would actually get people like Itzel and the tens of thousands of folks like her a pathway to residency. That was in 2012, and right now it's 2025. Nothing has changed, and if anything, the situation has gotten harder because DACA is in peril. and people like Itzel, who are so incredible and contribute so greatly to our amazing country, they deserve to have status in this country above and beyond a work permit and a social security number. They deserve to have a green card, and we need that as a country. So I implore you to contact your senator, pick up the phone or send a quick email and let them know that you support DACA recipients and that you want to see them make magic happen by helping DACA recipients actually get on a pathway to residency. Rather than axing the program, which is what's on the horizon for us, we need to get these young people actual status and security in this amazing country that we are privileged to have them in. Please pick up the phone, send the email, and share this podcast with someone else who maybe is an activist and an advocate and an ally like you. I'll see you on our next episode, my friends.